kusikia maoni yao na Kiswahili imeishia hapo. Now, let's come back to the conversation we're having with Dr. Obongi. And you're saying that this is a country of change that is ever changing without change. And now also Franklin Mkwanja has joined as Executive Director, CMD. Thank you so much for making time. But Obongi, I'll allow you to...
Yeah, so I actually was giving you a scenario.
Yeah.
If you dropped in this country and went to our repositories of records, our National Archives and Documentation Center, the National Bureau of Statistics, and many others, and just read the papers, you think Kenya is such a sophisticated, very highly developed country. Because everything that we need to do is on black and white. He talked about our excellent constitution. But we never implement those very high-sounding policies and outlines that we have had. If we implemented the current constitution that we have, we will actually not need to wait for 2030. We will be something else much better than we are. We violate it with impunity. But the question will be is, where did this start? When did the rain start beating us? That is where I say we actually need to understand probably our history. Because our political base is one that is built on two key principles, if you see them as principles. One, there is the principle of primitive accumulation. Two, the principle of patronage, client and patron. And this has its roots in colonial Kenya. We are not blaming Wazungus. No, what we are saying is that we need to understand how we came to be who we are today. In colonial Kenya, we had a state that is controlled by, few elites who owned the country. And they controlled the agroeconomy that was the engine that drove the Kenyan state at the time. The Lord Darameas of this world, the Lord Grogans of this world, the Karen Brixtons of this world. We have had these names. The Lord Egertons of this world. So they had the control of the Kenyan state in Nairobi on their hands. The governor fundamentally was actually a puppet of these great men of means who had owned the country. Believe you me, at some point, what we call Nairobi was owned basically by not more than 4 people. Lord Grogan, then there was Cullen Brixton and a few others, and then you add into that mix the prominent Asian businessmen, A.M. Jivanji, Suleiman Velchi, and they owned what we call Nairobi in terms of land, in terms of business, in terms of everything. Now, the transition to independence, and I call it a transition, not independence, the transition that happened, we removed these white elites, we put the African ones, who own everything from the means and processes of production. We have the Lord Egertons of our time, the Lord Dalameas of our time, the Lord Grogans of our time, who control the state in Nairobi in ways that make sense to them. The slight irony in Kenya's post-colony is that there is a distinction between, there is no much distinction between those who run the politics and those who have the money. They are one and the same thing. In colonial Kenya, the governor was nothing before those settlers. Of the Happy Valley. I'm sure you have heard of these glorious stories of the Happy Valley, where some evil things dominated, which I don't want to mention on a live TV, like this one. The political elites filled in these two shoes. One of the elites who control the wealth through primitive accumulation, and the politics. That is why, Trevor, if you are rich in Kenya as a historian, I'll start tracing who in your family held a prominent political position in this country. Because wealth and politics go hand in hand. There is that intersection.
Yeah.
if you look at many of the Asian business people who have thrived in this country, they do so because they have links to some extent with these political elites.
Yeah.
So if today you are flaunting a bit and doing a few things, and I'll know that either your father or your grandfather, at some point had a job in government at the high echelons. We are not talking about the small men and women who live hand to mouth, who work in public service.
Okay.
So the relationship then between these political elites who control the politics and the wealth in our country with the citizens is that of patron and client.
Yeah.
They serve us, we pay them. They serve us, we feed them. They give us royalty, and then we pay them.
Okay.
That is why, partially, money has become one of the most critical things in election campaigns in this country. You have to look like you are a man of means or a woman of means to sail through a political position in elections in this country. That's a given nowadays. The days when Martin Shikuku, when Honorable George Anyona will campaign with their power of oratory and win seats is long gone in this country. So you have to be a man of means. So even the poor Kenneth Mbongi, if I had some small means and look flashy and wonderful, people will see me as a savior. Okay. That is where our problem lies.
Okay. Mkwanja, we were trying to answer one of the questions that was in the previous Madaraka Day speech by former President now Uhuru Kenyatta, and he said fundamentally we must ask this: how have we built on what was handed down to us? This is the conversation we were talking about before you came in. Do we have much to celebrate on the 60th Madaraka Day?
I think we have to positively criticize ourselves. That in as much as the historical context has shaped a citizenry that is unable to keep the leadership accountable, and the leaders that have been fashioned out of lack of accountability are deficient, we must also look at the progresses that we have managed to make. If you look around the region, you would say that we have managed to handle and overcome some of the major crises that we have gone through as a country in a way that has left us intact. And one of the things that has done that is what my good colleagues and I've been listening in as I came here, that there is the leaders in the rooftop. On the rooftop, and there's everyone else in the penthouse, and there's everyone else on the ground floor. But the connections between political power and economic power, the ones that have the economic might being in charge of controlling the levers of power, has also helped to save the country occasionally. In that the political elite will quarrel and put the country in trouble, but they are quick enough to mend fences and make sure that the downtrodden are still surviving, because they need them, as voters. They need them to pay taxes so that they can use government as a business, partner. And anyone doing business with government is very affluent, either giving the business or providing the services. So the idea that peace or lack of it in our motherland depends on how elites settle their interest is, in my view, both a positive and a negative thing. The second thing I want to mention is that we have made progress in terms of particularly developing and safeguarding our political rights. Although in the most recent times, we're seeing threats to clawing back some of these rights, and we need, again, to up our game. We need to up our antenna in terms of making sure they are safeguarded. I think we procrastinated for far too long on emphasis on political rights, and we need to move this conversation to, economic rights, so that then we can be able to build a country that is equitable, a country where there is, equality, and also be able to shift the focus of the people from looking at leaders in the manner and the frame with which the good Don is speaking about, but to look at leaders from their track record and their capability to be able to transform our society. And all these challenges, I fear that we are in a place where we have normalized and almost celebrating the wrong things. That we have to reward the wealthy for being generous, or is it that as a country we revere the wealthy and generous, or is it that when you are a leader, it is bad manners not to gonya people when you meet them, to leave them with something when you meet them? Or can we shift this conversation to discussing issues and not transacting on the very basics? Citizens need to understand that the individual problems that they go to leaders to solve. My wife has been locked up at the maternity facility. My son is at home for lack of school fees. We do not have the next meal. They need to understand that this so-called personal level problems collectively are our challenges. That we are food insecure. We do not have a proper healthcare system. We do not have a good education system, and we do not have capacity to be able to provide services and goods to all of us in an equitable manner. And therefore, they need to make it an election agenda so that leaders can be grilled and held accountable after elections on these promises that they make about improving the quality of life for the people.
Yeah, but Deuri, is our problem a lack of perpetuity of vision? We all agree that we have this Vision 2030 coming through, but the previous administration, which the current leader was part of, had the Big Four agenda. That was not achieved, it was shelved, now we're talking bottom-up. Is the problem a lack of perpetuity of vision? We don't have that focus, that this is what we're doing as a country, this is the direction we're going to, therefore it is like a baton, you hand a baton to the next person to reach that shared vision.
Well, I think that's entirely true. The political parties which are supposed to be driven by ideology are a mirage in this country. So other than the constant, which is that they desire to be in power and that any means to get them to power are valid, there is no other ideology in the political parties. And that would be the first place where you would expect that there will be vision. I usually find it extremely amusing when we talk of bipartisan discussions. Because how do you have bipartisan discussions between political parties that are devoid of any ideologies? In a true context, when you are having bipartisan discussions, you will find that the predominant value of one political party is that perhaps they are socialist in nature. They would want to take measures that protect the large majority of the poor, are reasonable in their means of taxation. And you may find that the other party is largely capitalistic in nature in terms of their ideologies, and so they favor big business and enterprises. And so when you are having then bipartisan discussion, you are trying to bridge the ideologies of this party and the other ideologies of this party, because they think in completely radical, different ideological positions, and you're trying to find a consensus between the two different and diverse interests, so that if you are saying that this party wants to tax or create more incentive for the big business and affect the small people, you're trying to find how can you bring down those incentives for big business and bring up the incentives for the large majority, so that you're meeting somewhere where you're developing consensus. So that's a unique feature of our political parties, and then it also boils down to what Daktari here was talking about, this quest for primitive accumulation of wealth, because it is only the accumulation of wealth that is a true guarantee that you would be able to sustain and maintain yourself in power and be able to run in the next election. So if you then consider everything that is happening in this country against that context, historically and even right now, you will see that most of the measures or the projects that are even initiated by government have an aspect of how can we be able to accumulate as much as it's possible using these projects that are designed to hoodwink the public, that they are for public good. But the primary consideration is private good. And until we are able, and I have to say this, that it is not lost. Not everything is lost. We have accountability institutions that either be they Chapter 4, Chapter 6 accountability institutions, or be they other institutions that have been set out in the Constitution that are trying, within a very, very difficult environment, to maintain that semblance of restraint on the use of government and its resources. And we must commend, for example, the courts, the Kenyan courts, for the good work that they have done in the previous years to ensure that the excesses of the executive are, in a way, restrained. But what we face and what we are worried about now is that there appears to be a more concerted effort, and it's not as overt as it was in the last government, because in the last government it was extremely overt. We're not going to give you money, we're not going to do what. But even in this administration, there's a covert attempt to still muzzle the judiciary. You will see it if you look at the estimates, the budgetary estimates that have been given. You will find that the executive and the legislature will take home a huge share of the national cake, while the judiciary will be, left, with the crumbs that are falling off the table. And what does that translate to? Inevitably, it translates to a strangling of the independence of the judiciary, so that the judiciary has to pander to the whims of the executive and the legislature if it is to get a fair share of what it is entitled to. And so I would always want to urge the members of parliament to remember this, that today they are in power, and they may want a system that works for them. But they have to remember that tomorrow they will not be in power. The things that are happening right now to Jubilee are likely to happen to them. So as they make laws, and even as they consider the proposals that are coming before them right now in terms of the finance bill, let them think of their worst enemy in power and legislate and come up with laws and come up with proposals that will ensure that if it is their worst enemy in power, they are not going to suffer. Okay. Because it is important, and I think this is the tone of the discussions that we've been having, to always have the historical perspectives of this country in context as you make the decisions going into the future.
Okay.
Because if we don't pay true homage to history, it keeps coming back, it keeps biting us, and that is why as a country, and I think that's what Don was saying, that we have changed that does not translate into any meaningful change, because we are ignoring our history.
Okay. We're always changing without change. Yes.
I think that's quite right. Trevor, the question you asked about papers, you know, the big four, the various session of papers we have had, they are just that, papers, as opposed to being very clear policy pronouncements that inform our governance. What matters in our political mobilization and organization is who has the highest amount of money. That is the product of what I called earlier accumulation. And we have come to be a country that has a portrait of you are rich, you have power. You are poor, you are powerless. And we have used this to literally buy the electorate. If I may give a hypothetical example, if I had access to about 50 million or 100 million shillings today, I could be an MP of my local constituency in the next elections. You know, and that is really where our tragedy is. And this did not start yesterday. In the 70s, Mwalimu Nyerere described us as a man-eat-man society because of this competition for taking everything, very acquisitive tendencies among our elites. You know, of course, the Attorney General Njonjo then dismissed him, that if Kenya is a man-eat-man society, then Tanzania is a man-eat-nothing. They have eaten nothing. But essentially and fundamentally, Tanzania is more of a nation than us. You know, probably what they lost in primitive accumulation, they gained in entrenching and embodying certain values that make them have more feelings of a nation than we are here. That's why the normal conversation, the normal elite public conversation is just basic. If you go wherever you come from, Trevor, I will guarantee you, I don't know where you come from, but chances are very high that you'll be called Kiongozi. You'll be called Mzee, and you're not an old man. I have been to my own village setting. I find men and women who are older than me calling me Mzee. Mzee is not a connotation of age; is the resources that come with it. So for me, then we need to change our polity from a mere market where political support is bought if we have to make meaningful transformation to the way we govern ourselves. Without that, we will be around. Okay. That I will guarantee you, my brother. I'm not a prophet because I'm a historian, and if historians are prophets of the past. But I can see that without any struggle.
Trevor, I thought Daktari was going to say that he needs to have some illicit wealth, because in politics you don't go with your hard-earned money.
Why?
Illicit because we actually don't recognize meritocracy in this country. We pay for mediocrity. You know, you don't rise up and achieve, and people say you have done A, B, C, D to be rich, essentially. If you work in a state parastatal, like I've worked in a state parastatal, people wonder why I'm still struggling. and yet I was a CEO of a state prestator for about 7 years. You know, they wonder why I have not gone to politics. Still, I remember somebody recently told me, "Bado nakula choka." I thought when you served in utalii as a CEO, you needed to graduate from the classroom, you know, to politics.
Politics.
You get that is really the orientation that our people have.
Yeah.
And when you have the masses with that kind of orientation, which is a product of the slave mentality that we have inherited, then you need a leader who can have a break with that disastrous past.
Okay. Kwanza.
Yes.
You know, there was a conversation before you came in, we were talking about appointments and loyalty. In fact, nepotism and tribalism was the main conversation we're having. But then there's also the issue of how then do you appoint people who did not share the same vision as yourself? And the two panelists had said that consistently, all the previous administrations missed that mark, despite having it on the Constitution 2010 now, that needs all appointments need to reflect the face of Kenya. It was still missed. But the counter-argument to it is, how then do you appoint people who did not share the same vision with you?
I mean, are we saying that the governments that we've had previously and the current government only gain support from people that have a shortage of merit to take those jobs? Because the problem that we're having is not about appointing loyalties. Is it that the loyalties are of low merit? And that's a problem that we can see, and we don't want to mention names. There are people in portfolios that can basically not be able to impact a thing in those portfolios. We will be respectful enough not to mention names. But that demonstrates one thing, that could it be deliberate that the center wants to control by putting people in positions that they're incapable to lead and offer leadership in those spaces? It is, if you look at the elections, it's a very, close contest that we've had since 2013, 2017 to 2022. In 2022, a difference of less than 250,000 votes. That tells you that there must be significant effort by the winner to bring together the country by making appointments that do not just reflect the loyalty, but also make sure that he's appreciating that he's risen above the margin of victory to leading the country as a whole. Even if you were to give some opportunities to your own supporters, can that go hand in hand with meritocracy so that people can be able and certainly be able to say, Trevor can be able to do this job beyond being a loyalist? They have the requisite credentials.
Hold that thought for a bit. Let's cross over first to Stephen.